Hi there, welcome back to the Dan Cave and welcome back to another video build series. So this video build series is going to focus on this. So this is the Airfix 72nd scale Bristol Blenheim Mk.IV. So I don't know how many parts it's going to be. It's going to be as many as it takes. I would have thought around probably 4 or 5, similar to what I did with the Victor. Kind of work through kind of major components, build it up, cover decals, paint and weathering, etc. So we're not going to hang around. I'm going to go straight to the bench and start the build process. So part one's going to look at putting together the wings and fuselage. So this recent Airfix moulding is slightly different from probably what would have been traditional kits, and certainly the previous Blenheim kits that were available. I think Airfix had one a number of years back. So actually the wings and fuselage go together. Relatively minimal interior work. The wings have some interior work for landing gear, but unusually the cockpit is completely separate. Now that means they can do multiple versions, but it does kind of get you into that kind of build phase very, very quickly. Get some major bits put together, and then kind of in parallel you can also start work on the cockpit kind of section, forward fuselage section separately. So we're going to start with the wings and fuselage, and let's dive straight on in. And just one more thing, thank you to everyone who's liked and subscribed the work so far. If you've not subscribed, please do so, and if you like the video, give it a like, leave a comment if you want. Thanks for watching. And just one more other thing, you may have noticed the intro is a little bit different. So rather than a full screen version of my head, which nobody probably wants to see, certainly if you're watching on a large screen TV, you certainly don't want a close-up shot of this mug. So I've stuck me kind of up in the corner on the main part of the screen. Hopefully if I can get the technology working, you'll see me starting work on the Blenheim. So look down somewhere and watch me build. I'll voice over anyway. So thanks for watching again. Well, thank God for that. Now that bloke is shut up, we can actually crack on with the build. So as I said in the intro, it's going to be wings and fuselage today. So you can pretty much get the two fuselage halves together. There's just one piece goes inside. I'll paint that once it's assembled. It's pretty straightforward. That's basically the aft section of the bomb bay. Just sits in between the fuselage halves, and the forward portion of the bomb bay is actually on the bottom part of the wing, which you'll see a little bit later on. So I'm just using some Tamiya extra thin quick setting. Not really sure why I've gone for the quick setting this time. Probably because I wanted to crack on, make some progress, and try and get some of the airbrushing at bomb bay and wheelbase done fairly quickly after this. So again, it's the usual process. Run the Tamiya extra thin into the join line. Capillary action will take over, and it will kind of make its way around pretty much all the seam. It's worth sometimes just kind of running that Tamiya into the join, putting a little bit of pressure on it, and that'll help that molten plastic kind of squeeze out and give a good solid join, but also minimal cleanup required. So here I've just started removing from the sprue the spars that go inside the wing. So these form part of the landing gear bay. Not really sure they needed to be full width because they're not really visible once they're in there, but it seems to be kind of a thing that Airfix are doing on their newer kits. So there's a little bit of cleanup required, just making sure that bottom edge is correct and make sure it sits in what is a very shallow groove in the wing. Not ideal. Makes the part a little bit hard to get it aligned properly because it's not a very positive location. But with a little bit of careful kind of bracing, I can get that Tamiya extra thin in. So now, before the wings go together, there's some parts of the landing gear need to be assembled first. So there's a series of parts, part of the kind of landing gear structures, that kind of traditional, I suppose, World War II British bomber era landing gear. Lots of metal work, not quite the kind of modern single piece landing gear struts that you'd find. So again, there's two on each side, and then there's a front spar which sits across those parts once they're glued in place. So it's the same process, getting it off the sprue, removing the sprue points. So a little bit of regular extra thin is used here because that will give me a little bit more kind of time to work those parts and make sure they're aligned correctly. There's basically two locating points on each. As you can see on that one, it's actually dropped out of place. So again, that's probably a consequence of the fit of the rear spar section. On the other side, the fit was quite snug, so the parts kind of held themselves in place, but that one just didn't. But they go together pretty straightforward, and then we can drop in the front spar section. Just checking again for alignment on that, make sure it's sat in its little groove correctly. So the top of the spar should basically glue kind of flush with the wing. That's a good guide for knowing it's in the right position. So now I'm just removing the bottom wing section. So I suppose the one benefit of having the wings molded in this way is it is relatively easy to get the alignment spot on for the wings. The dihedral will be pretty much spot on. The only risk in this is that the fuselage halves have to be perfectly glued together so that they fit snugly in against the upper wing section. But we'll have a look at that a little bit later on and see how that went. So now, just a quick dry fit, see how those parts align, make sure they work together well. So now that I'm happy with those first little bits of construction, I can jump straight in with a little bit of airbrushing. So I'm going to use extra acrylic interior green just to give the Bombay, the wheelbase top and bottom inside the wing, give them a coat of interior green. So these are all sprayed through the UMP Apex. I think I've thinned this extra acrylic with UMP thinners by about 20%, let's say. I've done it by eye, but it's about 20%. Not a huge amount, but not a small amount either. So I know a few people, I've heard reports of people having problems airbrushing extra acrylic. Personally, I've never had a problem. I find their colours very good. Good opaque colours, don't take many coats. And in this case, the extra acrylic has gone down on the bare plastic, which should be fine. It's not going to be handled much in those areas. So now that paint's on, paint is dried, it's time to get those two parts of the wing together. So there's a locating tab inside the wing with a little pin on the top and a recess on, pin on the bottom and recess on the top. So I'll start by putting a little bit of extra thin into those locations. And that'll form the kind of basic alignment of the top and bottom wing. And then we'll just use the extra thin to run it all the way around the join line around the wing. I've got a selection of clothes pegs lined up, and they'll act as a way to secure those two halves together and put a little bit of pressure on them. That'll help kind of force that molten plastic out of the join line and hopefully result in minimal cleanup. So far, the fit has been excellent. I think the cleanup should be relatively straightforward. There's a few areas I can see already may kind of come back and require a little bit of further work. So I'm just getting the pegs on, getting kind of strategic locations. Anywhere I think needs a little bit of extra pressure just to make sure the parts are firmly pressed together. And as you can see, I've used a grand total of 5. So all this will be left to set for a good couple of hours before we'll go back and do any further work on it. Yeah, pretty happy with that so far. So I think it's in fact actually the next day when I get back to it, and first bit of work is using some of the UMP sanders to just remove any excess kind of molten plastic, check those seam lines. Can immediately see there is a little bit of we'll say a sunken line in around the engines. There's a couple of points on the fuselage. So I'm using a little bit of CA glue and I'm pouring in some micro balloons, which are basically a very fine plastic powder, and mixing that with a CA glue. I'm going to use that as a filler. If you use CA glue on its own, it can be very hard to sand, and it's definitely harder than the Airfix plastic. Using the micro balloons kind of softens it a little bit, makes it a little bit easier to sand, and minimizes the risk of kind of damaging that surrounding area. But it is just a select few areas that need a little bit of touch up. There's a couple of tiny little sink marks on the bottom of the fuselage. So just a tiny little drop of this CA and micro balloon mix. That'll be enough to fill the gap. I mean, one of the benefits of this also is it's incredibly quick drying. You could use a CA accelerator as well, which will even improve that drying time even more. But once nicely cured, it's time to get in with a thinny stick from UMP. Once we've removed the kind of bulk of the excess, we'll go back with a finer grade, and then we'll progress through the grades to basically get that seam line down to exactly where we want it before we do any further construction and priming later on. So there's a couple of little areas on the wing leading edge, a couple of areas in around the engine, all got a little drop of filler. Easy enough to remove that excess. I think this is the 180 thinny stick. So these sanders I've had pretty much the best part of a year, and it's the same set, and they've done probably 20 kits. I mean, obviously, the more you use them, they'll effectively become a little bit finer. They're not quite as sharp as they probably were new out of the box, but I still find them perfectly usable. I struggle to remember which grade they are. I tend to just know by feel which one I'm using. So here I'm just progressing on to a finer grade and making sure that I get that seam line nice and smooth. So it's always a case of letting the sander do the work. Try not to use too much pressure. If you use too much pressure, you'll end up either reprofiling unnecessarily or gouging some of the plastic quite badly. So again, for this little wingtip filling that we did, progressing through the grades again, getting it kind of sanded back to where we want it to be. So yeah, so pretty happy with that. I just used a makeup brush, was donated by my wife, which I used for just brushing away the kind of excess dust. So now basically those two components are ready, and now it's time to check that fit between the fuselage and wings. So because the wings are kind of a fixed position, how the fuselage is glued together is extremely important. It needs to be perfectly positioned to make sure that it's a snug fit, no kind of natural gap, but then obviously not too tight either. You don't want to put too much pressure on it. But in this case, it seems to have worked out pretty well. The gap is snug, can run a little bit of extra thin down into that joint, and that will secure the fuselage to the wings. So that's it for part 1. So let's go back to the hairy bloke for a bit of a wrap up. So there we go. That's part 1 complete. So part 1's a very short video. I think it runs to about 20 minutes, maybe a bit less. Depends on how long I talk for now. so I'll try and keep it as short as possible. So we got the wings together, got the fuselage together, then both those components put together. They'll be put to one side. Part 2 is going to look at the cockpit area. There's reasonable amount of parts, level of detail painting, a little bit of dressing up of that cockpit area to try and make it look reasonably good through all the glazing. But it's 70-second scale, so you know there's only so much you ever, well, certainly I ever want to do in terms of detail in a cockpit at 70-second scale. So work on that's going to start pretty much probably later today. I've not done any of the cockpit. Literally what you've seen in the video today is how far I've gotten with this model. So it's been a couple of weeks since the video's been out, so I thought, you know, at least get that first part of the Blenheim out, albeit a little bit shorter. Just make sure that the content is still out there, and you guys that have been willing to kind of watch, and certainly those that have subscribed so far, don't kind of forget who I am. Obviously, you know, if you haven't subscribed, please do so and give a like as well. So yeah, so there we go. That's part 1 done and dusted. Again, you know, big thank you to everyone who's watched. I hope you enjoyed the video. And yeah, stand by and wait for part 2, which will be coming up pretty soon. So thank you everyone, and we'll see you later.